Okay, so hello there everyone. I am here with Daniel Jones, author of a book called, which I'll hold up to the screen now, Look Into My Eyes. Technically an autobiography / book about Asperger's syndrome, so this is actually really interesting. So, how are you?
I'm okay, thank you.
That's good to hear. First question I've got is, what really made you want to write the book? How'd you go for it?
Well, I like writing anyway. It's one of those things that I can just do on my own. I constantly have ideas in my head and always want to share them, always want to get my ideas out there, because or else it seems pointless just having it in my own head. And after being diagnosed, so I was diagnosed as an adult, after being diagnosed, there are certain parts of me that sort of don't make sense. Which have always been that way, but certain parts that don't make sense, that sort of conflict. So one part, for example, is I hate eating, I hate cooking food, but I eat vast quantities of food. And I don't have any appreciation for it. I don't enjoy it. I don't.
I remember because I read in parts of your book and other material that you've sent me after we started talking, that you see it as more just a function to survive, which is really all it is for you. Like, if you don't eat, you'll die, but you also just want a lot of food for some reason.
Yeah, and so it's bits like that sort of conflict, that if I don't like eating, why do I not just not eat or eat the very minimal amount to survive? But because I don't, so this is something I started learning from actually writing the book. Because I don't don't appreciate eating, so putting not liking aside, because I don't really appreciate the food, I don't really have a sense of what it tastes like or anything. I'm aware things taste differently, so I can tell the difference between a steak and a piece of chicken, but it's not so pronounced that I'm that aware. So I like a big mouthful of food, and I like just lots of food to make it feel like, I don't know, it's almost so that I can somehow know that I've done it. And so it's things like that I started learning from writing the book. So one reason for writing it was learning more about myself, was thinking, so as a therapist, I work with people where I'm not them, and so I can help them with their problem because I'm not them. So people get trapped in their problems. They don't see, the example I give to people is, mainly blokes will sit at home screaming at the TV when they're watching football and saying you should have passed, you should have done this, you should have done that.
Like every bloke who is into sports or football, that is the most accurate.
But the reality is that if any of those blokes, these people on the pitch are paid millions to do what they're doing. So if you said to the bloke who sat drinking a beer or whatever, screaming at the TV, okay, you go onto the pitch and you do better, they probably wouldn't even get the ball, let alone, manage to get it anywhere near the goal. But what they've got is that they can see it from above the pitch. So the person who's on the pitch is being chased by, say, 12 people, sprinting along, trying to keep a ball at their feet, trying to judge who's going to try and tackle me, who's behind me, who's doing this, who's doing that. They're trying to juggle all that.
It's a lot to consider in your head.
And they're trying to then make a guess of how should I act next. And they should have perhaps passed. But that's not what they decided based on what they could see through their own eyes on the pitch. But where you've got is that you're looking at it on a TV, you're not emotionally involved in the game. Some people obviously are emotionally involved in the game, but not like the player. You're not sort of...
No, because you're not the one doing it, which is something else.
So you have that element to it, and that's what I wanted to have with me. I wanted to have that detached element of, if I write it down, then I can look at it almost like looking at me. So me looking through my book, or even writing the book, is like me looking at me as a client. I can see things and patterns that I can't see from inside
it's like
myself.
That can be very difficult, because the first question I asked you after you told me on Facebook that you had replied to the message I sent you, and reasons I send it on multiple platforms is because I didn't know if you actually checked the website regularly, so I just sent it to your Facebook page as well. You sent me an email saying you were happy to answer any questions, and I think the first question I asked you, which must have been a bit of a shock, was, did you feel you were taking a risk about it? And surprisingly, you said no. because it hadn't crossed your mind. Looking back on it now, and we'll get to a review later of some other material you sent me. Do you think there is the potential risk of writing it personally, like because of the backlash, not because of like sales or anything?
Probably not. I know that there will be people that, so for example, I know there'll be parents that will hate it because it's generally a positive book. So most parents hopefully will like it, but I know there is a minority of parents that almost like to be stuck in the world they're in, or stuck in the problems that they've got. So you get people that are very problem focused and people that are more sort of, I want to find some strengths and I want to look forward and I want to see how we can help and develop things. And I know, for example, with my parenting stuff I've done, some parents will just say, oh, that wouldn't work with my child, and my child's not like that. My child has this and they've always got this, and it's going to, and they get very negative about it. So I know there's going to be that backlash at some point. There'll be the people who read it and say, this is too positive, that you're trying to find strengths in a problem. For example, I know the American community, there's a lot of, there's a sort of chunk of the American community that want to try and find a pill or a treatment to cure autism, like totally just somehow eradicate it.
Which is something really intriguing as well, because like when I was in secondary school, because like you're around 38 or so, I am 17, so in secondary school, I think it was year 11, a group were, for the scripted unit in drama, were told to do a play called Find Me, and I had sort of been told about this by my teacher at the time, what it was about, because it was, because in year 10, she said, oh, there's the possibility we might do this one, or we might do another. We didn't end up doing that one, but the thing that really got to me was, we watched part of that play. We didn't watch the whole thing, because obviously it had to be cut down. We watched part of that. And what happened was, because, it's set in the 70s on this sort of true story. I mean, the name of the girl is actually unknown, or real name, I should say. People looked at it as if she was sort of like mentally ill, and like this is a comment I used to get from my brother a lot, like, oh, you've got a mental illness, and it's not something you can cure, and like things like that. Do they sort of like leave a small personal insult to you, or do you just try and get on with it?
Well, so far it hasn't been a problem, but I know there will be people, and I would just ignore it and think, well, people have their views and beliefs. So for example, because I do hypnosis, if I'm in a pub, which is quite rare, but if I'm in a pub and people hear that I do hypnosis, inevitably there will be someone who's quite cocky, quite arrogant, who's getting drunk with their mates, who want to come over and say, yeah, I bet you can't. And I just say, no, you're right, I can't. I've got nothing to prove. I couldn't care less whether I can or can't. But if I say, yeah, okay, I'll give it a go. If I then succeed, I've shown them up because they said I can't do it. And so that's going to make a situation explode and it's going to make it bad. If I fail, they're going to go into a sort of whole boasting thing of, I'm going to now look superior and big compared to you because you failed to hypnotize me. So the easiest thing is just to take the wind out of their sails and just say, you're right, I can't. Even if the people around me are saying, oh, you should do it, my view is actually, and it's the same with writing my book, that there are people that if I rise to it, even if I rise to it and try and be positive or try and do, be kind or something, any kind of reaction is going to get another reaction back. And so it's not really worth it. It doesn't mean sometimes things don't bother me and affect me and make me annoyed with it, but I'll let it go. And I didn't have that, say, for example, when I started YouTube. I didn't have that 10 years ago when I started on YouTube. If someone was being genuinely nasty towards me for no apparent reason, so not even just trying to be constructive but not doing it very well, but genuinely just going out to attack me
just out
for
there
me,
to insult you, sort of
yeah
thing.
I used to end up thinking, well, that's not true, and I don't like things not true, so I'm going to reply and point out that's not true. But because they've got a reaction, they will keep trying to get that reaction further, and they'll take it further, and they'll get their friends involved, and so.
Yeah, which like I mean, sometimes you could just put that down to it's a guy drunk in a pub, so you know he probably wouldn't do this normally, but there are the rare cases where it will. This is a question that kept going over in my head yesterday as I was cycling home, whether to ask or not. So we all know out in the world there are like political extremists and there are extremist groups. For example, you've got ISIS. Because I spoke to you also about people with Asperger's, myself included, thinking we are in a minority group, and like a guy who I'd had a feud with like fairly recently, who I told I was writing an autobiography about myself, which has got a similar title to yours in my mind actually, and more details about that come in a separate video for those who are subscribed to me. He did say this needed to change, but also what went through my head yesterday was, do you think there is the risk of people with Asperger's who could become so annoyed or so frustrated that they may become extreme or too extreme?
I think there already are. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any names, but I know I see people who I strongly suspect that they've got Asperger's. And I know, for example, the guy that wanted to kill Donald Trump, the lad that wanted to do that, he had Asperger's. And he got very fixated on, I think he thought he was solving a problem.
I say this purely for a joke, but killing Donald Trump wouldn't be the worst thing in the world.
So he saw himself as...
Please don't come after me, America.
He saw himself as, I think, trying to do something, someone has to stop this guy. And
you can understand why, though, with like some of the comments made and all of that.
I think the bit that sort of irritates me, and it's not just with Asperger's, it's with other things as well, is where people focus on the label in relation to people rather than like when they say this is something I can black man stabs someone in North London. Shouldn't it just be a person has stabbed someone in North London? Do you have to, if it was a white person, would you say white man stabbed someone in North London?
This is something else that intrigues me as well, because like people now target Muslims because of what ISIS does, and this is something else as well. I'm going into this completely blind, I should mention, because I haven't written down any questions. A lot of them are just in my head, spur of the moment. Next thing worth saying is, because with my book I actually put in a foreword saying, preferably if you are a parent, do one of two things if you're reading this to your child. One, stop, because everything I am saying in this book is true and I'm going into a lot of detail. Or two, pay attention to the warnings provided. And what surprised me is, or if you have written it, I haven't actually seen it yet because I only read 2 pages in a car on the way to Yorkshire before I started writing this with a dog laying his head on my keyboard. Because, you can tell I'm doing this on a laptop. Like, did you actually include any sort of foreword or warning, or did you have it cross your mind too?
Yeah, I said that I'm writing everything very blunt and honestly. So good and bad. So, for example, I have read some other people's biographies while I was writing mine. I read a couple of others just to see what kind of things people write. And what I found was a lot of people that write their sort of, this is my experience of having Asperger's, write almost like a woe is me type thing. This is how I'm negatively affected because of it. So they write, oh, the world is really difficult to deal with and that, these sort of things, which is true. But what they fail to write is the negative impact they have on the world around them, and sometimes the manipulation you do to control the world around you, at least in my case. So, for example, in primary school, I learnt fairly early on that if I had one friend, then I could have that friend. They saw it probably more as a friendship. I saw it as I've got someone now who can do all the errands I don't want to do. So I would do the boring things, the things they don't want to do, but the things that I'm happy to do. So, for example, it could be we've got to cut out shapes, some paper or something in primary school, and someone has to talk to the teacher and ask the teacher for something. So I'd say, oh, would you mind just going over and asking Miss if we can get that? And I will get these cut out. And so I would then focus on cutting out the shapes while actually I'm using my friend to go and talk to the teacher, which they don't see as me using them.
Not everyone with Asperger's likes those sort of social situations.
No.
I'm the other way around. I'm perfectly happy to enter one. But have you heard of a scheme called NCS? Like National Citizen Service. It's very heavily advertised each year.
Yeah.
I did that last year, and I was around people for about 4 weeks straight. Then I was in Holland for a week with my family. And being around people for that long, you're just like, fucking hell, I want some time alone here. And then it gets to the point later on, about halfway through the week in Holland, I'm just like, for fuck's sake, can we just finish this now? I was around people constantly, with like only 2 days to myself in between, and not even that was sort of uninterrupted. So I was getting frustrated, particularly in Holland, but also because I had to share a room with my brother, and that's not an easy thing to do. Maybe it's because we don't get along, or maybe it's just because like people don't know when to back off. And I talk about this in my book as well, because I'm quite early into it, so to speak. I'm on like my life in year 4 at this point. And stuff. And I did mention a teacher who said she was the special needs supervisor, but like in my mind, and I say, like you, I'm very blunt and honest. I say this. I just sort of called her more of a controller, and like she did not know when to back off, and that was often the case with people as well. So like by the end of that, I'm just like, for fuck's sake, can we just stop?
In one school there was one family I worked with. The teenager stabbed a teacher with an art knife.
Wow.
And my view, listening to it, that obviously the school's view was entirely focused on how this child needs to be sent to the local PRU, and they need to have they need to be not be in mainstream school, and they've got all these problems, and all the focus was on how bad the child was.
That's something you see far too much, though, especially if something like that happens.
But me hearing it, it was actually the other way around. He kept saying, back off, I feel trapped, back off, I need some space, can I go and sit in, outside the teacher's office, can I do this, he was giving all these options to try and get out of the situation and be somewhere on his own, and they said, no, you don't dictate to us, and they
this
essentially
is something you see a
trapped
lot,
him
though,
in a corner.
because people don't know when to back off, and I do say this very specifically. She did not know, this teacher, she did not know when to back off. All she did whenever I was angry, because for some reason, she was always there. I have no idea why. She was always there, didn't leave you alone. I was just like, just back off. I mean, not literally, I was like far too nice to say it. But even when I was angry, all she did was make things worse. And nothing changed. I mean, would usually just continue to the point of I would be angry, maybe even for days. I don't completely remember, because, this is like 10 or so years ago for me. It's to that point where other people would slowly have to try and calm me down, or even just one comment, even not aimed at me, or just anything said casually, sent me off on one. And like, it can still happen today, but today I've got a better hold on it, because I've actually learned, with help from other people, how to sort of control that anger. So it happens a lot less, but while I'm trying to force it down, get rid of it, I don't know if this happens for you, it slowly builds up and explodes.
I think the difficulty is anytime it's like someone trying to quit smoking. If you're trying to quit smoking and you're focusing on trying to quit smoking, you're technically still thinking about smoking.
I remember,
so
because
if you're
mentioned this, I think you mentioned this in the YouTube video you did yesterday. Because I actually went and watched that. I've actually gone and subscribed to your channel as well. Also, I'll be linking your channel down below for people who are interested to go and have a look. I mean, there's definitely some fascinating stuff. I've not checked it all out, obviously. I haven't got that much time. I suppose my next question is, I think I'll do the reveal. You're writing a second version of Look Into My Eyes. What's making you decide to write this one? And what is the particular
I've written it, and there it is.
Wow, that is very good cover.
It's much thicker. There's an extra 50% of content.
That is a lot, and I'm not even that far into this one yet.
Yeah. Mainly, I was writing it because there's technically not much new tips and strategies within this version, but what there is everything's in one place. So when I've been giving talks,
are you going back over the points you've been over in this one, or is this like more later on in life?
It's it's all over the same sort of time period, but instead of it being autobiographical, I'm using examples from my life, but I'm focusing on it being more helpful. So
this one's the more autobiography version, the one I'm holding in my hand.
Everything in there is essentially autobiographical, but there is tips and strategies throughout it. So, for example, when I talk about being a young child, I say, here's the difficulties I faced, here's the strengths I felt I had based on me being me, here's the challenges, here's what people did that didn't help, and here's what people did that did help.
Because, as you mentioned earlier, you were diagnosed as an adult. I was diagnosed from a young age. To this day, I don't know how young. But all my life...
Yeah, one of the things that helped me or made me write that first version was that when my dad died in 2014, I was clearing out all his stuff, and most of the stuff obviously I didn't want. It was of no interest. My brother didn't want it. But I thought, I'm going to grab loads of the papers that he's got. And so I grabbed loads of his papers, and I found a letter back from when I was probably about 3 or 4, probably 4, found a letter from my dad to social services saying, because my mum and dad had split up by then, saying, I think something's wrong with Daniel. I think he's got some kind of mental problem. Here's a description of the traits. They said, I don't think he's he's not thick, he's not, and he was trying to figure out how do you word Asperger's when there's not, back then there wasn't a word for it, but how do you word it? And so he was trying to do his best to word, he's not stupid and clumsy, but he bashes into things. He's not rude, but he won't say good morning, hello, thank you. He'll sit down and play with Lego, but he won't be creative with it. He'll essentially do what he's choosing to build, or build what's on a box. He won't build a dragon out of Lego and play with my brother or something. He was trying to describe all these different bits, and as it happened,
I'm more intrigued that he went to social services instead of someone who was actually experienced with
because of my mum and dad splitting up. Suddenly we became obviously it struggled to keep where we were living, so we're at risk of becoming homeless, and so social services got involved because of that, and because of conflict going on with my mum and dad, and so they weren't involved sort of heavily. I wasn't on child protection, or I don't think I was even on child in need kind of level.
They were just there to keep an eye on things. But they were
just there, just to check and make sure things were okay. So that's why my dad approached the social worker. But what happened was, obviously there's a certain level of stigma. If someone says your child may have some sort of problems, suddenly the parent, I don't want my child to have problems. So what happened was mum, who comes across very respectfully and very kind, and my grandparents, they just said to the social worker, no, Dan's perfectly fine. It's just the dad trying to cause some problems. And so the social worker just writ it off, and it didn't even make it to a psychiatrist or anything. And so no one ever checked me out. And so I think because I didn't have an anger problem or anything when I was going through school.
Lucky you, then.
I was always very, very quiet.
I was not so lucky.
No, I think the only times I get angry are when I'm in a position where suddenly everything's out of my control, or where I'm being backed into a corner. So by blending in and just disappearing into the background, people paid no attention to me, meaning I had nothing to get angry about. So I think the only times I got angry were, for example, if people tried to bundle me on a playground or something, as kids sometimes try and do, I would do whatever I have to do to make sure they're not grabbing me and touching me and stuff. And I couldn't care less, even as an adult now, if I break people's arms and things, to make sure that doesn't happen.
If it's for self-defense, then you'll think
I would
you've got
do
the moral
exactly
high
the
ground.
same.
You'll think you've got the moral high ground.
But I wouldn't even think.
Something else that is really intriguing is when I spoke to you, I'm actually going to quickly get up the Facebook conversation on my phone. I won't show it to the camera, obviously, because no doubt you'll want that sort of thing kept private. I'll just get up the conversation on the phone, see if I can recall some of what I said. Ooh. Because I kept on asking you, do you think we can be seen as things like minority groups? You said yes, and technically we are. I think what intrigues me now is that you do all this therapy, and you do all these other things. things like hypnosis. I think something for me was throughout my life, not just because of Asperger's, I ended up with a lot of problems. I mean, I'm asthmatic, I'm openly gay, so that causes me another problem of like being in another minority group as well. Thankfully, I've not faced much in terms of discrimination from that. But the sort of discrimination, I wouldn't even say discrimination, because people can be like really arrogant. I think the problem I have is like until year 4, at some point in year 4, I had no friends, and I was just like, oh, this sucks. But I was also just sort of, because I didn't know I had it. Well, my parents knew, and like I could tell from that sort of age, like things were different about me. I would often go into trances. I would stare into space. I would daydream. And some might just argue, oh, that's just a kid's imagination. I think I'd been told passively by year 3 that I had it, but this made no sense to me. I was like around 7 or 8. I mean, I was probably 8 actually, or close to. I was just like, okay, I've no idea what that means, but okay. I always sort of was able to blend into the background, but not because I was shy, and I talk about this in my book, but I've not spoken about how that sort of had the effect. I also ended up, and still have, trust issues, because one of the 3 original friends I had just sort of turned around and betrayed me, and just started like beating me up, manipulating me, and working his way into my head so that I kept forgiving him each time. I think part of the question is here I'm trying to get at is, have you witnessed anything like that? Have you heard tales of anything like that before what I just said?
It definitely happens, and I would say that with people I've worked with, it seems to happen far more frequently than people might realise. I would say most families I've worked with, the children have told me that kind of experience, that someone that they see, I think part of it is, so it might be a slightly different situation, but part of it is that people will see someone as a friend, say from your point of view, but the other person is seeing it as someone that they can use, because they see that they can manage to get a hold over you. They can, you're searching for friends. Anyone who's got a need that needs to be met, that they're struggling to get met, will often try and grab onto something that meets that need, even if it's inappropriate. So if someone, just using smoking again as an example, if someone has a need to relax but can't relax, but they have started smoking in the past, it's easy to go back to smoking because you know it.
You'll end up like having these sort of relapses. And
with relationships.
Again, I use trust issues, is that if you have an experience like that, I wouldn't say it's traumatic, but if you have an experience like that, what happened with me is, and I don't know if it happens with everyone who's got them, it could well be different, is slowly over time I started to suppress emotions, I started not caring, I started being a lot more blunt, ruthless, and some might argue, oh, he's a teenager, maybe that's what they do anyway. It's not that sort of experience though, because only last year, again, on NCS, did I realise that I actually had the trust issues. I always had them, I just never knew. I only realised it then. I didn't trust anyone, I didn't even trust my family, and I only trusted 5 people, if that. And you became cold, you became emotionless, you didn't care for anyone. And, I mean, thankfully, I am slowly managing to fight through that. But, like, not everyone's going to be that lucky. So, what do you really take as that sort of view? I mean, do you think there's enough support in the school system?
Well, there's a lot more now than there was when I was in school. So when Asperger's came in as a term in about 1997, as a term in the diagnostic, DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual, whatever.
Just these random abbreviations that people use, but no one actually knows what the letters stand.
I wasn't, even if they were going to try and diagnose me with something, that wasn't a term to be able to be diagnosed with. Now I know there's far better special educational needs provisions within schools. I know there's government financial cuts all the time, and that makes it hard for schools to get hold of enough money to get extra staff in to support people.
What's really interesting is you bring up that they've got more support now. When I was in school, all, and I had realised it, and I constantly tried shutting it away. I constantly, I wouldn't say prayed, because I don't believe in God as such. I mean, back then I did, so I guess constantly prayed, like, please, 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 just go away. Please, just make me normal. And then I realised, like, I'm stuck with it. There's nothing I can do. And
I think that really is a shame on...
Yeah, they didn't offer much in support in terms of more being controlling.
I
which
think,
was the problem I had.
Some of the difficulties there are, one, training is different in different places, and although I like to think that nearly everyone who becomes a teacher or in the caring profession or whatever is doing it because they want to help others, the reality is not everyone has the right attitude to it. So you can get someone who'd love to be a therapist, but they're completely rubbish as a therapist. They're too horrible as a person to be a therapist, or they're too controlling, or there's something wrong with them.
Yeah, because you say that, I go back to the teacher I mentioned earlier as well. You could tell she clearly wanted the job, and like I think back when I was younger, I actually didn't have a problem with her because it was very rare I would see her, but I think over time when she got the position, she just sort of aimed to abuse the power she had that came with it, and I constantly saw that there were people who I look back now, they were much better for the job. They were so much better for it, and I mean, like, it is very much in the case of, well, these people are better for it, why she got it? Why aren't people actually making a decision based off someone who's good for it? And I don't know if that's an opinion you might have a lot.
Well, I think the difficulty is that in the world of work, people get jobs, and you can't just necessarily... They get the job based on how they do in an interview, and you can't necessarily then just kick them out of a job unless you've got good grounds to do so, or else they sue the company. So, for example, I worked in a place where there was a manager who was probably the most incompetent manager you could ever imagine.
But probably like a really nice guy to know, wasn't he?
He was okay to know, but he was a useless manager, and the difficulty was that the company...
I can imagine like one of my colleagues watching this, and if he ever had a YouTube channel, he would be writing something really long about one of our managers at work, as I speak.
But this guy... he really should have lost his job, but the company couldn't sack him. They gave him the job because he did well in the interview and everything. They couldn't sack him, so what they did is they had to give him a promotion to a different role that was not the kind of role that he was doing. So that meant that technically, because of being a useless manager, he got promoted and got extra pay, which is the wrong way around. But they couldn't sack him because he didn't do anything sort of legally wrong or anything to break any rules. He just wasn't...
Do you think if like they had said, we might look, we're going to let you keep the position, we're not going to promote you or anything, but we're going to have to give you training alongside this, you're going to have to be observed. If that sort of thing was done, what would your
I don't think it would have made any... He would have gone with that because he would have wanted to keep his job, but I don't think it would have made any difference. And likewise with this teacher you're talking about, the chances are, once she was in that role, either people didn't observe her enough to realise that she wasn't very good at that specific role, or people didn't give feedback. So, for example, if you and the other students weren't telling other teachers, this is how she comes across, and then you've obviously got to be listened to as well and accepted for your views, not just accepted for, yeah, but she told you off and that's why you're doing that. So I think that's a default position, is you're only slagging her off because she's told you off, when it's not necessarily, it's actually I'm being honest.
I think it's a bit of both, because I did speak to my parents about it, and like back then I didn't understand that she wasn't the best for the job. I wasn't old enough to, because this was in primary school, and like my reasons for slagging her off become a lot more clear in my book. I mean, everyone has teachers which they hate. There's no way around that, but I always got on with most teachers because I could form those kind of relationships, and I can still form those kinds of relationships with people. Which is how intriguing it can be, because you've no idea whatsoever of, are you going to like this person, are you going to hate this person, are they going to be a middle ground that you like them as a person, but you don't like them as, say, a teacher or a manager. Because those experiences are all too common. So, got about 10 minutes, unless we're able to push it a bit. I'm not sure if you can, because like you've told me you've got an appointment which you need to keep. So if we can push it by 5-10 minutes, then we will. But, who knows. So, just to ask you a bit more about like your book and your current work that you're doing with YouTube and things like that. Obviously, I spoke to you about YouTube over Facebook. You said it was a way that you wanted to do this for people for free, and and you mentioned in your why you started YouTube video and such, other therapists or hypnotherapists weren't happy. So going to your YouTube now and the amount of followers you have, because you've got a lot more than I ever had before, or loads of things happened, I'll get to that in a minute. Is it still working well for you, or do you foresee yourself stopping with how many times you fucks up?
That I won't stop again. I stopped previously, as I've mentioned before, because of trolling and things like that, and it just gets to you, and you just think, a bit like when Stephen Fry suddenly quits Twitter or something. You know, you can put up with a certain amount.
I don't follow Stephen Fry on Twitter, so I should probably go do that. I mean, I imagine his stuff's pretty hilarious.
It is, yeah. But yeah, he'll tolerate a certain amount, but then he'll just get like one run of really bad stuff that you just think, no, I'm not having this anymore, sod it, and then you just quit it for a bit because you just think, well, why?
What's interesting about Stephen Fry though is he is, I think he's nearly 70 or so. He's an openly gay man from back when it was frowned upon and you faced so much discrimination, but he also has depression, and this is all this is well-known stuff. And I mean, the reason he probably can't take that is very valid, because he has had so much discrimination, he gets so much discrimination, that people don't really know what to do about it. And, like, that's clearly why you quit YouTube. I mean, I took a long hiatus, but that was because I was sort of losing the vibe of making videos and stuff on my old channel before it was hacked and deleted by some morons.
I find it difficult to know, to sort of keep up the motivation to post regularly, because the only way to be I've been on some of the YouTube creator days, I up in London, what have you, and I try to post they always say post regularly, post so that people will know, even if it's only once a week, post so that people will know every Friday or whatever there's a video going live and things like that. But to keep up that kind of motivation and momentum is really difficult to do long term.
Yeah,
and
I know.
Then
I know what you're talking
some
about.
People say they want vlogs and things. I'd love to see you vlogging, but me vlogging, I'm not very good at just chatting, saying, "Oh, hello, this is what I'm up to today, and how's your morning?"
Not everyone is. I mean,
about that.
I sort of did a couple of things like that. I mean, I did one for a drama trip on my old channel before it was hacked and deleted. I did one for a day in the life sort of thing, which I had been requested to do because I had a Facebook page.
So I did a couple similar to that. I did a couple.
And it was my mother who commented, actually, because I left a list of choices. It was my mother who commented a day in the life, and just like, you're a mother. Why do you need to see this? Probably because I spend so much time in my room. But so I did a few, which again were similar to that. There were things like I did a day in the life of an Asperger author. Just show this is what I get up to. I go from cafe to cafe, typing on a MacBook. Now that's intriguing. Why go to a cafe of all places for it?
Well, because I just find it more comfortable. I do some at home, but I find it more comfortable. I find that I can put headphones on, be in my own little world. I'm just staring at a screen, but something about they probably get the tables and the chairs heights and everything. Something about it just fits better. I'm able to sit and write. And then when it comes to like when my mind drifts off and I just need a brief break, at home I just stare at four walls. Whereas if I'm in a cafe, I can people watch for a bit and see and get ideas, and I can see things. I think, I haven't mentioned something about that kind of thing, and I can judge. So, for example, writing this book, I could obviously judge. This is how I'm feeling about that situation. I'll type that down, or things will remind me. I'll see children playing with a parent or something, and it will remind me of something, and so I can then think, that's reminded, and so it would stimulate my brain a bit. But some places are too busy, so I always sit in a corner. I
just sort of try and sit in an area you've got lots of space, and if things get complicated, you can move out easily enough before something does happen. I normally move to another cafe once I need the toilet, so I'll spend a few hours in one, and then because I'm obviously not going to leave all my stuff set up while I then go off to a toilet and then come back again, and I'm on my own, I normally think, right, I've spent 3 hours here, I'll go off somewhere else. Time to move on.
And Costa's a good place to go because they'll retweet your tweets. So when which helps with raising some awareness of what you're doing. Whereas I've tried it with Nero, I've tried it with other coffee shops, Starbucks and things, they don't retweet. Whereas Costa, if I'm sat in a Costa saying, and I take a photo of my laptop or something and a tea next to it and say just in Costa working on my latest novel or my latest book or whatever, they'll retweet it, and that just helps to spread a bit of word. So I quite like Costa for that. So little
it's
shout
nice
out
when
to Costa.
people do that sort of thing as well. I think another question I have for you is, do you have any sort of like modern celebrities as inspirational figures, or like because something I often find is I watch shows like Arrow and The Flash, and I find myself able to relate to a lot of characters in those shows. Maybe because we have similarities outside of the fact I'm not including
for me,
Asperger's in that. Do you have any
growing
like
up, well, my sort of role models have always been essentially fictional. So Sherlock Holmes has always been a big role model because other people frown upon his methods, what they would class as bad traits, like his being blunt with everyone, his being essentially quite isolated, and not having very good social skills and what have you. But for me, I would see a lot of it as actually I can relate to that. I can relate to these sort of traits. I can relate to being like that. I can relate to not taking what people say as quite how they mean it, but reading deeper. And I could relate to him. I could relate to Superman, of wanting to help people, but be anonymous. So in the first Superman film, there's a scene where, as Clark Kent, him and Lois Lane get pulled into the alleyway and mugged at gunpoint, and Superman he's bulletproof. He could obviously just take the gun out of the person's hand, crush it in his hand, and say, "Look, piss off." But instead of doing that, he's pushing his glasses
like
back,
that
and
certain level of anonymity that people want to keep. And you see
he's,
a lot in
he's
comic
pushing
books,
his glasses back, and
TV shows like that,
and he's sort of saying, "Look, no, we don't want any trouble. Don't want any trouble. Here, take the purse." And Lois, who's not bulletproof, is there sort of saying, "You're not having my effing purse." Not quite like that, but I'm imagining the 18
that's
version.
one way of putting it.
The 18 version of Superman, that's what would be happening. But Clark Kent and Superman, he's just happy not to take the credit. He's happy to drop into someone's life, help, and then leave again. So these sort of and like Quantum Leap, you're probably vastly too young to know Quantum Leap.
I've never even heard of it.
No, exactly. Quantum Leap starred Scott Bakula, who was the captain of the Enterprise on the Enterprise Star Trek TV show. Before he did that,
Star Trek TV shows. If anything to do with Star Trek, I've watched the Abrams films.
Scott Bakula. So Quantum Leap is about a time traveling guy. He creates a time machine, and he leaps back into the past and leaps into someone's life in the past, and he gets trapped there, and so he ends up having to save the person's life in some way, like solve an issue in their life, to be able to then leap out of that person's life. And he's always trying to leap to get home, and so his whole aim is he wants to get home. He's got a wife and kids in the future, in like 2020 or whatever it is, and he's just leaping and leaping and leaping, attempting to get home. It's a brilliant series, one of my favourite TV shows of all time, probably. But again, I could relate to that idea of you're humble, you don't want lots of credit for things, you just want to be able to help people and keep anonymous. You don't want loads of fanfare, loads of people around you all the time. So they were my kind of role models. Real role models, I quite like Derren Brown, and his attitude to things.
Now, I've never really watched Derren Brown, but I've seen enough to know that he's just a guy who just does not give a single shit.
I like Stephen Fry, and his sort of, he tries to do what he can for others to the detriment of himself often. I like, Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart, and got to meet them recently, which was brilliant.
Congratulations! That is a very good experience.
I've got a signed Patrick Stewart, a signed complete works of Shakespeare, signed by Patrick Stewart, limited edition. Wow. So I got to meet them, So these are the sort of people. One big role model is a guy called Milton Erickson, who's a famous hypnotist that's dead now. But his sort of, if you were looking for a real life Sherlock Holmes, he would be it. He
That's fair enough, because like
people would walk in, sit down in front of him, and he would say, "How long have you been cheating on your husband for?" And all they would have done is walked in and sat down in a chair opposite him. His observation skills were ridiculous. He could read your thoughts by reading your lips and your throat and how they move.
I'm kind of glad I never met this guy, because I would be surprised as to what he could have learned about me that I didn't know about myself.
So I look up to him and his abilities. And again, he had all this power, but he chose to use it good. He said back in, I think, the 1930s, somebody was telling him about Hitler, and he said to this German who'd come over to one of his courses, he said, "Go back to Germany and tell someone to kill him, because if they don't, it's going to end bad and there's going to be an enormous war in Europe." And he'd worked that out just from a couple of sentences said about this guy who's rising to power in Germany.
And of course the guy fucked up, because we still had that war and shit happening.
Exactly.
Now
yes.
the Jews have as a result.
Milton Erickson, I write a lot about, talk a lot about, because I really look up to him and I admire a lot that he did. He was struck down by polio when he was a child and was paralysed fully, and all he could do is move his eyes, and he taught himself to walk again from being totally paralysed. And he did that twice, because he was struck down by polio again when he was in his, I think, early 60s. He had, towards the end of his life, nearly every single muscle had ripped off his bones from spasming so much, and he could only breathe with a quarter of one lung. His tongue was dislocated, and yet he would still smile and laugh and do therapy with people, even though...
That is just amazing. I can see why you look up to this guy. I mean, just from that description, that is amazing.
Well, when he went on his... at the end of high school and before starting university, he was told, you've just recovered from polio, so do something relaxing, do something where you're sitting down but outside. So he went canoeing 1,500 miles on his own. And at the time that he did it, he started off unable to walk, and by the time he returned from 1,500 miles, he could walk out of the water carrying the canoe on his back. So he's someone who I hugely admire for what he's achieved and how he did everything.
Final question before I let you ask me a couple quickly, because I'm sure you've probably got a couple for me, haven't you?
I'm sure I can think of some.
That's a yes. Final question is, when is Look Into My Eyes 2nd edition or Volume 2 or whatever it's going to be called expected to be released?
The official release date is March 27th. So that's the beginning of Autism Awareness Week, the first Monday of that week. It will probably be available a bit before that, just to make sure it's definitely available. But that's when the official release date is, and it will be available on Kindle, iBook Store, Amazon. You can order it in Waterstones, WH Smith's, Barnes and Noble, wherever you are in the world. So it should be available then. Okay,
that's brilliant. So I'll just let you ask me a couple of questions now, and then we'll get on to where people can find you and stuff.
So what led to you wanting to write your book? Because you're only young, so...
if you're asking why, my grandparents, and I'll show them quickly, gave me this on Christmas Day. And it had a signed note from you saying, "To Jack, all the best, Dan." And they told me they met you. I don't remember where, but that you had Asperger's, that you wrote this. And I think both me and my parents, I don't think my brother gave a shit, to be honest, but that's my brother in a nutshell. Both me and my parents were quite surprised that you had chosen to write this down. And my dad said, maybe you should do that, because he's turned it into his life's work. I mean, I was so stunned, I'd just gone off into like, what? When? How can someone be this open about it?
And I think, obviously, from the open point of view, I probably do overshare, which is fine when it's about me. Obviously, if it's touching on like relationships and things, then it's probably not fine. But if it's about me,
everyone has to try and work on, though. I don't think that's a problem with people with Asperger's.
But if it's about me, then I don't mind too much if I'm very open about it. And my view, as I think I said, in one of the emails to you, I included things that I never would have revealed when I was your age or younger.
Yeah, you did.
Things
hence why I only looked at them to myself, and I'm not going to like tweet them out or anything. I'm going to.
But they're sort of things that, you know, I was happy to reveal, because I thought, well, actually, if I was younger reading this, so if I was, say, 14, 15, 16, and I'm thinking, I don't know how to get these skills, I don't know where to go with my life, I've got these problems, I've been told it's lifelong and there's, you've got it forever and ever. Do other people have the same experience as me? Because I know, as the one with Asperger's, other people generally around me don't have a huge chunk of the same experience as I have. So it was, what can I do so that I can give someone else that kind of, you can read this and see the worst. See the worst here. Why should I? It's a bit like where people don't talk about sex. People say, "Oh, no, don't talk about sex." But actually,
no, but like often there's a reason for that. It will make people feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, but at the same time, there comes a point where you sort of want to be able to, you're going to have to discover these things for yourself, but knowing what sort of within the range of normal, or within the range of this is how things sort of happen, or whatever it happens to be, there are certain subjects that actually it is helpful for somebody, even if they couldn't have done it when they were that age as well. And even if you always have, like in the films, the famous the dad will sit on the bed to do the sex talk with the son or something, and the son cringing, thinking, no, you're the last person who I want to hear this from.
Yeah, I know. But everyone
the reality
will have that.
But the reality is you often would like someone, ideally not someone so that you don't have that cringy factor to it.
And that's why you do the YouTube.
And so that's why I thought, well, if I do these things, I couldn't. It's better that someone hurls abuse at me for, say, stuff that I reveal that perhaps should be embarrassing to me. Like I will be very
instead of other people about it. So
so for example, when I was probably, I don't know, late, sort of probably 8 to 12-ish, I wouldn't know how to ask like parents and things, not my parents, but friends' parents or whatever, like to go to the toilet. So I could soil myself, wet myself, and it would happen. And there's no way at that age that I would want that to have been public knowledge and that I would go and talk to anyone.
I can understand why.
But now I would admit it on a YouTube video like this, thinking, well, if it gets lots of abuse,
that's a very brave risk to take, because
but my view is, if it leads to people saying, you're whatever, well, I'd rather have people attack me than attack the child, perhaps, who watches the video and thinks, oh, phew, I'm in that same sort of boat, maybe not exactly the same thing, but it could be the same type of thing.
Similar situations.
Yeah, but I'm in the same boat, and it is normal, it is okay, it is, even if I don't admit it now, it is okay that this is me. So it's trying to make things, it is okay to have flaws and to have things that are embarrassing when you're younger, because you grow up and you can talk about things when you're older that you can't talk about when you're younger. So when's your book likely to be finished? How long is it? How far in are you?
Pardon? How far in am I?
How far in are you?
Not very far. As said, I'm currently on like year 4 and 5. I've split the sort of chapters down into like 2 years of each part of school. So I might do year 6 and 7 in the same chapter. I don't know. But
what are you hoping to get from it for the reader? So why should someone bother reading it? Or is it just for your own personal, I want to share it? Or?
No, it's because I feel like people do need to write more about this sort of thing, and that's a lot. I mean, I'm a singer, I'm a songwriter, so I also do write books on the side, but because until you told me how in Facebook messages I could get them self-published, I don't think I ever finished them. I could imagine how they would finish, I could imagine what I wanted to go on. I could never finish them, and I would get such a joy out of writing them. With this though, I am determined no matter what to finish it, because I have that motivation to. But I'm probably going to do my own video later towards the time. I mean, if you want to do an interview with me on your channel about it, then I'm certainly up for that at some point. Or I can message you available times as well. But so people can come track you down and follow you and see what you have to say, whereabouts can they find you? Bear in mind all links are in the description, so...
Yeah, my YouTube channel is Dan Jones Hypnosis. So the URL is an old URL that I created years ago, but the actual is easier just to search on YouTube for Dan Jones.
Yeah, I know, because that's what I did. I just searched. I mean, you were like close to the top of the search bar as well, so I mean, I'll have the link in the description. But if you guys want to go search for it, Dan Jones Hypnosis.
For websites, I've got 2 websites. One that focuses more on just the Asperger stuff, which is alt-solutions.org. And one that focuses on all my other stuff, so hypnosis. It's got loads of articles to do with hypnosis and to do with therapy and to do with like depression, anxiety, all these different things. It's got loads of like video interviews with me, audio interview, all sorts of other stuff, and that's danjoneshypnosis.com. So they're my 2 websites.
There your Twitter, obviously.
Twitter is HypnoDan, or I think Dan Jones Author.
I think it's Author Dan Jones because I tweeted out to follow you, for people to go follow you. And
Author Dan Jones. That's the one that what I found. So for years I've had my HypnoDan Twitter account, and back in the old days, you would essentially follow everyone who followed you. But what ends up happening is you just end up with lots of spammy things come up in your news feed that you don't want. So what I want is to be able to just, for example, if I'm going to retweet something and things like that, I don't want to have to scroll through lots and lots to find the bits that I want to retweet. I know you can do like playlists, and you can do whatever it is, lists and stuff. On there. But on my phone, I can't do things like that. I can only really see the app. So what I wanted was to set up a Twitter account where I will only follow a small number of people, so that the ones who I'm going to either retweet things that they share, or I personally know, or whatever. But then my old one I also use, which is connected to my YouTube account, so all my YouTube videos ping out on my old one, is the HypnoDan one, which is what I am on MySpace and what I am everywhere. So
people are more likely to find you on your HypnoDan Twitter, and I'll link your Facebook page in the description.
Yeah.
But I think I'll wrap it up here because I've got to go get ready for work. I've got to go for a swim beforehand to prep the courses and stuff there. So thank you for actually agreeing to do this, because I told people I was talking to you on Facebook, like just a few friends, and they were just like, "Oh, are you recording it for YouTube?" I wasn't, so hence why I asked you. So thank you for agreeing to do this. I mean, it must have.
That's okay.
Hopefully, none of the questions were too uncomfortable
to
talk about. And I mean, hopefully we'll be able to do like other talks and stuff, and hopefully we can collab again for videos in the future. I think if I do another one with you, it'll probably be one where I will talk about my experiences, and you can ask me the questions for your channel, and I can message you sometimes. But so all Dan's links will be below. The video is likely to be uploaded in 3 15 minutes or so segments. I mean, I've just got to check the time. It's pretty much an hour long. So it might be
4 minutes.
It might be, or it might be 3 minutes. I don't know how it will work. But again, thank you, and thank you for coming along to talk about it. Obviously, massive respect to you for all the ground you have covered and stuff. So hopefully we'll see you again. My links will also be in the description to my Facebook page, to my Twitter, to my Patreon, where I'm currently running a competition that you could win one of 5 free books. I forgot to include this in the Facebook page post. They will be signed. I will sign them. I might even send them off to you, so if you want to sign them as well, by all means. And just go donate any amount on Patreon. And I mean, it's listed as like $15 tier reward. I only put that in because I needed to put an amount in. Any amount of money you donate, you're instantly entered. Rules are on my Facebook page. So thank you, Dan, for coming. And I will see you soon, guys. Peace out.